Welcome to the True Colored Crime Podcast, where we take a look at real animal abuse cases. The purpose of this podcast is to raise awareness of the warning signs and provide resources for things you might be able to do to prevent animal abuse. Fair warning, the content ahead is graphic. With that, here is your host, Dr. Lisa Fox.
Episode 2 of Forensic Files is a bit more uplifting than the previous episode. For this case, we cross the pond, meaning the ocean. Remember, I am stationed in Ohio. And we arrive in 2015 in a small seaside town called Margate, located in Kent on the southeast side of England. At this time, there was a small, less than 1-year-old pup called Chunky. If you research his case, it is listed as Chunky the Chihuahua, but he appears to be a very cute Yorkie mix. In November of 2015, Chunky was stolen from his home by a group of teenage boys one night, and unfortunately, this is where his story takes a turn. It was discovered later that at the time of the abduction, these teens were on multiple drugs. Over the next few hours of poor Chunky's life, the teens force-fed him narcotics, wrung his neck, broke his leg, punched him, kicked him, and using an aerosol deodorant can as a makeshift flamethrower, they set fire to his face. As if this weren't enough, the teens, thinking they had tortured the poor pup to death, left him in a rubbish heap near a busy road to finish dying. Miraculously, after everything that happened to him, Chunky survived the whole ordeal and was rescued and returned to his family. While researching this case, I did contact Chunky's owners via Facebook pages, but I didn't get a response. And I did try to contact the local RSPCA, which is the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty in Animals, but I haven't gotten any information from them as well. So from various news articles and sources, I was able to put together a list of Chunky's injuries. A quote from the RSPCA inspector from the Daily Mail article sums up the situation. The whole thing sends shivers down my spine. The defendants may have been young and confessed to being under the influence of drugs, but the cruelty they inflicted on this poor dog was extreme, barbaric, and inexcusable. Well said. From the pictures and the articles, it appears that Chunky suffered a fracture to his lower right hind limb, severe burns to his face, muzzle, and eyes, and there are multiple reports of a broken neck or some sort of cervical fracture. But I have not found a definitive radiograph or evidence of this online. From all reports, he remained heavily medicated for days at his local vet hospital to relieve his pain before returning to his owners. Forensically speaking, the facial burns in this situation are very serious of an injury, even though they represent a small surface area percent. Judging by the pictures, we can grade the burn as a 3rd degree, meaning that there is involvement of the entire epidermis and dermis, but the burns do not appear to affect the bone, which would be classified as a 4th degree. The TBSA, or total body surface area, can be determined using the rule of 9s. We break the body down into areas. 9% for the forelimb, 18% for the hind limb. The head and neck together equal 9%. The dorsal and ventral chest or thorax are 18% together. The dorsal and ventral abdomen together are 18%, and that leaves the perineum as 1%. Chunky suffered 3rd-degree burns to roughly 5% of his body surface area, including burns to the sensitive portions of his eyes. Severe burns are characterized as burns to an area of 20% or more, which can cause shock, fluid loss, and multi-organ failure. While Chunky's burns were horrible, they were fortunately survivable. If left untreated longer, however, this could have led to serious infection and even sepsis, not to mention the severe pain that he would have endured. The type of burn itself is a little harder to classify, as it has elements of a radiant heat burn from the flame, chemical burn from the composites within the can, and flash burns caused by ignition or explosion of fuels or gases. Chunky's other injuries are the result of blunt force trauma. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, is what we learned in our physics. It can only change form. So applying a blunt force impact transfers kinetic energy from the object causing the blunt force, in this case, we believe it was hands and feet, to the living tissue. So the injuries depend on the amount of energy delivered, how it is delivered, and the body's reaction to that force. These injuries can be classified as mild, moderate, or severe based on the amount of structural damage and inflammation. Without radiographs in this case, I can only speculate on the fractured leg and the broken neck. In lower leg injuries, usually only one bone is fractured when caused by a blunt force trauma. Neck or cervical fractures can also occur due to blunt force trauma or twisting or wringing of the head and neck. Fractures of the axis, which is the second cervical vertebrae from the head, are more common than fractures of any other cervical vertebrae. Last but not least, during this ordeal, the teens force-fed Chunky the same narcotics that they themselves had been using. While it's not mentioned in any article what these drugs were, we can talk about common drugs like what marijuana and cocaine will do when ingested. Marijuana and other THC cannabinoids attach themselves to the receptors in the nervous system. They release dopamine and other neuroactive compounds, and they may actually cause some pain relief, which would be good in poor little Chunky's area. But in high doses, they can also cause nausea, vomiting, tremors, hyperexcitability, urinary incontinence, and other neurological signs. Cocaine can have an effect on the nervous system within 10 to 15 minutes or less, depending on how you take it. This can cause seizures, tremors, hyperactivity, vomiting, and even hyperthermia, which can cause organ failure. Both of these drugs can be detected in the urine. So if we did run a urinalysis on Chunky, we could figure out which drugs were used in his case. Other drugs to consider in this case would be PCP, alcohol, mushrooms, and even just regular caffeine. After all of this trauma and abuse and cruelty, Chunky was chucked into a trash bin near a busy road and left to fight for his life. Miraculously, he survived. And through the amazing care of his vet team, he was reunited with his owners and made a full recovery. I followed his Facebook page up until about 2020, where unfortunately the pandemic led most of us to lose contact. But until then, he was thriving. So what happened to the teens? They admitted that they had done wrong in a drug-fueled rage. They pleaded guilty, and they were each banned from owning or being around animals for just 5 years. Yeah, just 5 years. They were fined around 2,000 pounds each, which is a drop in the bucket, and each were given a 12-month referral. So since I'm in the US and I don't believe that we have referral orders, I had to do some further research. A referral order is a sentence that requires the offender, which is usually a youth that has pled guilty, to agree to a contract of rehab and must be completed within the sentence period. They must meet with a panel of 2 trained community volunteers and a member of the youth offending team. So, pretty much a referral is an out of jail rehab program specifically for youth offenders. Obviously, advocates for Chunky did not agree with the leniency of the charges, and they did start some petitions to create an animal abuse offender registration and some for banning owning animals for life for these perpetrators of animal cruelty. Within a year, the one petition had over 500,000 signatures. And of course, Chunky made some public debuts to champion his own cause personally. If only all animal abuse cases ended up with a happy reunion, personally, I feel that we need to keep track of these teens as they age. We know that animal abuse is a gateway crime, and seeing what they did to this poor pup, I hate to imagine what's in their future.